Welcome to the Sheth Leadership Academy Lecture Series, a series of presentations delivered by Professor Jagdish Sheth, author of classic business books such as The Rule of Three and Chindia Rising. This lecture is How to Manage Diverging Customer Expectations, Part 4.
Managing diverging customer expectation is going to become more and more strategic, both from a financial viewpoint, operational viewpoint, as well as from a growth trajectory viewpoint. We talked about why customer expectations are diverging more and more. We talked about, in fact, 3 strategies companies can use to manage customer expectations. If the expectations are realistic and deliverable, then accommodating customer expectations is the right strategy. If the customer expectations are outrageous and undeliverable, then abandoning the customer is the right strategy. But then the third strategy is probably the most strategic and more important, which is really what I call altering the customer expectations, which means shaping customer expectations rather than meeting or exceeding customer expectations. So in this particular part of the lecture, I will talk about strategies for shaping customer expectations. Shaping customer expectations is becoming increasingly reality as accommodating expectations is becoming cost prohibitive and abandoning customers is becoming untenable. In fact, we have tried very hard to pretty much outsource marketers' work in pre-sales, ordering during sales, and definitely post-sales, which is customer support, to more and more automated services. Do it yourself. Let the burden go on the customer pretty much to manage their own expectations, and if there is something goes wrong, it is their problem, it is their fault, not the marketer's fault. So we already gone into significant automation, but my view is that it's not going to be enough. In many industries, customers are either technically incompetent or educationally ignorant. They don't have the knowledge to access information, even though it's available online. Despite online encyclopedias of anything in life, I'm amazed how I can do Google search today and get information on things I never imagined would be possible. We know that the 6 degrees of separation is no longer 6 connections. It is down to 2 degrees of separation because of the Google search engines and the internet and the social media technologies. But even access to all that information is not sufficient. Customers are still very much technically incompetent to evaluate the choices they have to make in many industries. And the best example is healthcare or wealth management, wealth preservation, health preservation. As we become living longer and longer is becoming more of a necessity, and people have no knowledge at all. Many technology products the same way. People have no knowledge about the technical specifications. They are very good users, but they don't know how the technology works for them. Third, customers want marketers to inform and educate them about how to make choices. Surprisingly, we have never looked at customer perspective about this situation. Customer is looking, sometimes begging for information from marketer. Not as much about biased information about the brand and all the exaggeration and the hype about the brand and the positioning, all the clever languages, but more about product knowledge. For example, in one of my books, I've gone heavily emphasizing that marketer can do a better job of educating and informing the customer by increasing the product knowledge awareness, and then of course guiding, steering the customer toward your choice as opposed to somebody else's choice. And therefore they are looking for information. And again, as I mentioned, this is so true in healthcare, it is so true in wealth preservation industries. Shaping customer expectations is what I would call cognitive modification. As we have seen in other addictive behaviors, we have the behavior modification clinics, and then they go through a regimentation of both reward and withdrawal, or not providing access, counseling, educating. That is all about behavior change. Here, shaping expectation is all about cognitive change. So I call it cognitive modification. If we can learn the techniques that one can use to shape or cognitively modify the customer's expectations, give them different perspectives, give them different orientations, I think we can go a long way toward managing this diverging customer expectations. There are 3 different ways of shaping customer expectations. My favorite is the one that I discovered many years ago, that what HR management, human resource management does about shaping employee expectations can become a a very parallel analog of what we can do with customers. So marketing can learn from human resource management on how to shape human motivations and expectations. What HRM does with shaping employee expectations, marketing can parallel the same for shaping customer expectations. So let's map what HRM does. HRM, first of all, has employee selectivity. They don't hire everybody. In fact, they go out of their way to have enough due diligence, enough interviews, etc., to say, will the employee fit into our culture? Is he appropriate? Is she appropriate for the task and the job, etc., etc. So employee selectivity, orientation and identification. Immediately they bring the employee and say, this is the way we do business. These are our procedures, policies, processes. And they begin to motivate the employee to identify as soon as they join with a company, take a pride in the company, motivate them to have a link as if the company is the extended family. Employees get enormous training and education as they move up the career rank, or as in their job there are changes in whatever occupation they are doing within a company. Employees are measured and they're given a performance feedback how well they are doing. Employees are given reward and recognition, some sort of a monetary and non-monetary outcome for their behavior. They of course get promotion, and there is a career path. Somebody figures out what is a good career path for each individual employee in a corporation. And of course, after a long contribution to the company in creating value for the company, the employees are given retirement, and when they retire, there's a whole ceremony of how to retire a good employee. And in many companies I have found, after retirement, there is a post-retirement community of the retirees. In the academic world, these are all emeriti professor. In many corporations have seen clubs or memberships of retired individuals, retired managers especially. I know that's very true in the Bell system, the telephone companies where I worked for more than 30 years of my life. Surprisingly, many of these processes that HRM does actually is also done in higher education with students. There is a student selectivity, then student orientation. Again, students have a curriculum and therefore is a career path. They are given the feedback, they are given the retired, the reward and recognition about who they are, grades, public recognition, role models, and putting them into some of the academic fraternities, for example, like Beta Gamma Sigma for business. And of course, students, when they graduate, are made into alums, and there is a huge alumni association that keeps the relationship going as positive toward the institution. So let's now see what we can do on the customer side. Customer selectivity is my biggest recommendation. I think typical marketer, when a customer says jump, we always say how high. Especially in professional services like ad agencies, law firms, accounting firms, my view is that this is myopic. This is where often you run into more difficulties down the road. So we have to learn to select the customers right. Probably 1/3 of all of the complications can be resolved through the proper selective process about who do we want as customers and who we don't want as customers. Leo Burnett, as a great ad agency, always had that norm. They believed that unless the client is willing to commit a significant amount of money to advertising, it is not worth giving them the creativity that Leo Burnett had, creating world-class icons for many consumer products goods. Credit card companies always have customer selectivity. People who have below certain credit scores are obviously not given credit. As I said, in higher education, a college admission clearly falls into that category. So if once we do customer selectivity, then we must engage customer into giving orientation of who we are and enable them to encourage them to identify with the company. So either a brand or a company legacy may be very valuable. We never educate customers how the humble beginnings of the company were, what were the accidental breakthroughs that took place, what did it take to create that innovation, how did the company struggle in its early days. All companies have great history, a great heritage, a great legacy, but customers Customers have no idea. Today, customers may be shopping at Walmart without ever knowing who was Sam Walton and how did he begin with his humble beginnings. Today, people may buy things from HP, Hewlett Packard, not knowing how HP came about. I have found always very fascinating to really get the history of the company or the industry for that matter, and I'm always amazed how much I learned, more in this case as an advisor as opposed to, let's say, a student or a customer, but it's same process. Very important also is to have customers experience your places of production. So how can you not organize tours of your facilities and your operations? Wineries do it all the time. The microbreweries or the breweries or local breweries do it all the time. So one can really engage customers either in a physical way or at least virtual way, complete engagement about the story about the company, and therefore creating an identification about the original values, the purpose, the roots, the struggles of the company. Customer annual reports. We never write annual reports for customers. We always write for shareholders. Why not? It's a great mechanism to say, here is our annual report to you, because for private equity companies like Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's customers are investors, and he writes letters for them as if they are his customers. Same concept around here. Can we create an annual report which basically says, what have we done for customers? Where we failed even, surprisingly. We should talk about that one, both the good news and the not so good news kind of a notion. Next area, again from HRM, that we can learn is customer training and education. I think this is where most marketers fail. They believe that the customer will learn on his own, and unfortunately customers do learn on their own and in the process have wrong expectations. Product was not designed for purpose A and they think it is useful for purpose A. In other words, it's very fascinating to watch how we don't give them a standardized orientation about our products, provide them new product training, except in B2B markets. If you are a seller of a large machinery to a large manufacturer, all the employees of the customers have to go through training. It is true in IT industry, it is true in capital equipment, it is true in everything else. In consumer products, we just don't do that for some reason. So new product training is very important. We train the retailers, like retail stores for cell phone service providers, but we don't train the customers. We can also give them usage manuals and recipes. That becomes a great educational learning mechanism. And we can feed to the customer on a regular basis overall industry trends and knowledge. Where is the industry going where your company is involved, your products are involved? Right now it will be a perfect thing to do for publishing industry, given this huge disruptive transition from the traditional way of publishing to the new e-books and new, in fact, self-publishing, which has become a major industry. It is true of all other content providers like newspapers, for example. And I think it's worth talking about the trends where the product evolutions are taking place. I think we can provide a marvelous job of customer training and education. And by the way, I do know that in several companies, B2B, customers pay for the education. It is not even free, which is interesting. So this is not a cost center. The training and education customer pays, and therefore it is a revenue center, which I think is a very important concept, because as a cost center, we will hesitate to do it, but as a revenue center, it adds to the top line growth strategy. Performance feedback to customers. I find this is very interesting. How can you tell the customers whether they have behaved well or not? We have a lot of knowledge about the customers. We have a lot of video footage about the customer shopping nowadays. Everything is monitored. Can we tell the customer that they did not behave well? I believe there has to be a customer etiquette, just like we have an employee etiquette, or we have in fact a family etiquette. And that goes about the manner in which the customer deals with the marketer, not what marketer deals with customer. Can we have a performance score on that, where the customer gets a grade just like students do, and there may be a failing grade or barely passing grade or exemplary grade? No, A+, for example. Xerox in the old days used to have all of their machines. This is the electromechanical days, where it will be wired, and therefore if you are overusing the machine, they will inform you you are abusing the machine. You need to buy a bigger capacity machine. If you are underusing the machine, they would come back to you again and simply say, this machine is too big for you. You don't need such a big machine. Let's take it out and put a smaller machine. We have similar possibility and probably much bigger and quicker possibility in terms of shaping customer expectations, giving performance feedback on their online behavior, because everything is tracked in online. When did you make that click? When did you make that purchase of the ticket in the airline? When did you do the download? We can give the feedback and smooth out the deviations or the variation that takes place in customer expectations and in customer behavior in this case, for example. Rewards and recognition, which we have done to some extent. We have learned loyalty programs, so we are no longer having promotions to attract new customers only, as we did many years ago. But with mature economy, 95% of your customers are the same as who bought from you last time. So this is post-purchase reward system loyalty programs, and we have all kinds of loyalty programs, but it is possible to enhance them, which says that if you have been a loyal customer, for your next purchase, I will give you a discount. Not those coupons that come because of the purchase I made, but there's a cumulative history. And with that, customers have earned enough to say, before asking, this is the reward, I know I have it for you. Surprise bonuses. Customers love surprises. They love surprise bonuses. We know surprise coupons. They love it. We know something that's 30% off, 50% off. All of this is very implementable, very doable, except we as marketers haven't thought about it. Recognizing exemplary customers. In some sense, in a B2B market, you do have reference accounts or reference customers, well-known industrial buying companies, and you have the chief procurement officer or a chief technology officer as you're giving an endorsement. That we have seen. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about making customer the hero, not customer giving the endorsement to you, but praising the customer, amplifying the legacy of that customer. If the customer is an ordinary person, how do you make it as an extraordinary customer, for example? Those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. And also last thing is that firing, as we do with employees, bad behaviors. So firing employees for bad behaviors, unethical behavior, immoral behavior, illegal behavior, customers do the same thing. But marketers never take the stand to say your behavior was unethical in the way you behaved with me. You probably lied and cheated. I know in a B2B, where I worked quite a lot, unfortunately, I often have found that you cannot trust a business customer. You may have a strong loyalty and there's a new RFP, the business customer immediately asks other vendors and sometimes shares your RFP. To me, it's unethical. But that's what customers do. But the business is so attractive that we compromise our integrity, our ethical standards to allow the customers. As I said, when customer says jump, we should not say how high, but ask the question, why should I jump? Interestingly, that's the firing the customer for bad behavior. Next area is much more interesting. Customer career path. Employees, we always have a career path. When will be the next promotion? Will be more lateral movement, rotating across functions, making them into general manager. I think we have to think same way. A customer is born, grows, dies. So cradle to grave consumption concept has to be implemented. And suddenly you learn so much by just thinking like that we can actually grow the customer as a consumer in a much bigger and better way than what consumer himself might have thought about it. You see that somewhat in a wealth management practices. A good wealth management practice, let's say at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, think about how this wealthy client's money will continue growing in a certain way and what legacy could be created. In fact, customers does not know much. It is the wealth manager who plants the ideas quite often. So, and technology and product migration is another one. Customers are today using this technology. You may have the next generation and you anticipate and motivate the customers to migrate toward the newer technology. IBM practiced this very, very well in the legacy mainframe computing days, from let's say 650 machines to 360, 370 machines to ultimately 3300 series, and now the world is into servers. Also, I think customer career path could be created in terms of customer clubs. Yes, clearly we all talk about the Harley Davidson hog clubs pretty much. There are many clubs possibility, but here clubs concept is more than just talking about the product. It is more than learning from other consumers peer to peer what they do with the product. Actually here it may become a mentoring device where you are guiding the customer's future behavior as a consumer in the marketplace, not just for your products but for all products by and large. The next one is customer retirement. I don't know why we never retire a customer. I've never seen that thing. Only the customer says, I don't want to be in a relationship. We say fine, or we try to resist and hold on to the customer. But I think it's very appropriate to, in a proactive way, to say goodbye. You as a customer have migrated out of the segment that I want to serve. If my segment is young, fully nested family, and you are an empty nester now, then why should I continue serving you? Because if I do, I have to now extend my accommodation to both a retiree mindset and a fully nested household. An empty nester versus full nester, there's a significant difference in their culture, in their consumption, in the way they want to buy, consume products, etc. So I can say goodbye to customers in a proactive, positive way. And I can also use experienced customers, experience with our products, in the way they have used the products, and make them as my consultants. Many retirees become consultants after that to the same company. I've seen this like at Pillsbury for one of their products like Bisquick, which is something that you make things like a pastry and all the stuff, and they really have housewives who used to make things with Bisquick, home-baked products, as advisors, consultants to other customers. But I think they can become very good consultants to company employees. They can provide enormous experienced base, reverse feedback to engineers, to customer support organizations, to billing and collection, because they have been on the other side of the fence, and therefore they can give you the customer or a user perspective. Mentoring other customers, as I mentioned to you, is very possible, and especially in a B2B market, it is very doable. Numbers are small, proximity is usually there between two business customers, and every business customer that I know always is looking for a mentor. Whether you are a buyer, whether you are a chief procurement officer, or you are a group purchaser of a series of products, a category of products, whether you are a factory manager, doesn't make any difference. So I think there is a mentoring possibility. Now the last one is post-retirement ambassadorships. I think customers can be great company advocates. After using your product for so many years, they can have what we call war stories, how they uniquely used your product, and you can send out on tours, either on the online YouTube type tours, or you can send out on physical tours, especially going abroad. In many ways, this is what the missionaries in church groups do, right? They actually promote, advocate a given faith into other cultures. It's very possible for customers to act as company advocates, as brand ambassadors, as well as in fact engage into retiree clubs, which are organized pretty much, and they can be a great resource after retirement, after stopping buying your products. My second recommendation for shaping customer expectations has to do with academically what we call framing. Framing is very similar to positioning in my mind. What is framing? Framing is giving a perspective. And framing is a way people look at the world. That's all. And I have to give you that perspective. And when the perspective I give you is so powerful that suddenly you say, aha, I never thought about it. It was always there. So perspectives are very known in psychology to change the view about what the marketer is all about. So for example, when big ballpoint came out, we had the fountain pens and we had the pencils, and the question is, how do you position big ballpoint pens? Do you call it as inferior fountain pen or a superior pencil? That's framing. Same thing, you have this owner-managed small businesses. If I frame them as inferior business customers because their revenue is much less than the large enterprises, or I can frame them as very superior residential customers. They can be either side. And depending upon how I frame is the way customers will look upon me as a marketer. So what are the techniques of framing? And there are 3 techniques for framing. One is the context. Context is the background, the atmospherics. The physical surroundings or the background are key to the concept design. So in retailing, for example, atmospherics, the way the music, the layout, etc., both for the mall and the retail store, employees' attire, they're all atmospherics, making a positive impact on the merchandise, which is the product you are selling there. Situations in which the brand is nested. If the brand is nested into ethnic cultures, then the brand identifies with that ethnic cultures and it shapes expectations of customers. If the brand is nested primarily among the retiree communities, then it is considered appropriate. It's sort of association primarily, and that's what happens. And of course, we know product placement in stores or point of sale makes all the difference where you position the product. I remember more than 40 years ago, when we were testing the Sheth theory. It's called a Columbia Buyer Behavior Project at Columbia University. We had this question whether post-instant breakfast, like Carnation instant breakfast, should it be in the breakfast aisle or should it be in, for example, milk powder aisle? Makes all the difference where you position the product. That is context. Direct suggestion is the second major way of framing the situation, which means you are directly giving instructions to the customers what to do, when to buy, and how to buy the product or the service. So making reservations at restaurants. There are restaurants that say we take no reservations at all, and other restaurants say you better show up on time, right? You already have framed the customer's mindset about how to behave. Assurance related to insurance claims. They can frame to say that after you buy the insurance from me, pay the premium, here are the consequences of what you will get in claim. The disclosure on that side, as one of the auto insurance companies is advertising right now in America, very fascinating. They are saying what will happen when you have an accident and how will you get your claim done. That's framing again. And we nowadays have, and I find it very useful, a complete shipment tracking. By the time I order, let's say on Amazon, I'm told I have ordered it. By the time it is in the shipment, I'm told it is in the following. I'm given a tracking number sometimes, a UPS number, etc. I know that office supply companies do that all the time when we buy, the office bottled water or, towels or whatever we buy from Office Depot and companies like that, interestingly. The third area is what is called selective priming, which means, again, it's context related. Color, shape, size, texture are all ingredients for selective priming. It's all through associations here primarily. This is very useful in designing products and their packages. So FedEx package. As soon as I get FedEx, it has already created an expectation that this is an important document. I better open it right now as compared to getting a mail through US Postal Service, for example. There's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of relevance. There's a sense of importance. I find fascinating as a consumer when I get a FedEx package as opposed to a UPS package. In fact, there is a difference in my mind. I'm talking about especially letters and documents as opposed to physical products. Our colors, we have always used them to identify genders, blue versus pink, identify different ethnic groups, colorful costumes. The way the color is a very major, powerful selective priming mechanism. And the last one is, of course, design in the automobiles or design in any products, whether the product is masculine, feminine, gender neutral, etc. These are all ways of priming, which means alerting the customer to be ready in a certain way mentally before they behave or before their expectations are created. So the second major approach has been what is called framing. First one is the HRM way of shaping customer expectations. The third one is much more important. If you cannot shape expectations voluntarily, with persuasion, with cajoling, etc., then you have to have your 2x4, which is compliance. Compliance means a behavior that conforms the requirements of behavioral prescriptions. This is how thou shalt behave as a customer. We have these prescriptions come from faith and the religion. They come from family norms. They come from the groups we belong. But in fact, quite a few compliances may come from regulation or company practices. So we have quite a few compliances, no smoking, and we all behave, which is shaping expectations. Seat belts, mandatory seat belts, because you have the punishment, if not a reward, to go with these behaviors if you do things differently. Parking for the disabled, even though it's empty and you inside irritate yourself, my God, this is just an empty wasted space, I'm looking at good space myself, but you do not actually exercise your expectations because you know you may get a ticket, you know somebody may be watching you, there's a surveillance camera. I mean, we are all aware about what happens to us as consumers. Emergency lane on highways, the same thing I find, while it may be empty, or HOV lanes, the carpooling lanes, right? Interestingly. And of course, there is a right of way for ambulance and for fire trucks. So fire and ambulance, when you see that signal going on, everybody knows to get away and be on the side and wait there rather than try to compete in any way or try to escape from them in some fashion. Your job is to be passive there. These are all shaping expectations through compliance of certain expected behavior. Compliance is most effective when it is not perceived as autocratic or prohibitive or needs a lot of effort, which means compliance is something where I believe it is the right thing to do. That's very important. So we have to have compliance strategies which would be palatable to the customers, especially majority of the customers, if not all the customers. There are 3 ways to use compliance in shaping customer expectations. First one is, they're all prescriptive, by the way. First one is a prescription by government regulation, which means there's a law, there's a regulatory agency or a body, and it enforces those laws. Prescription by group or social norms, which is another tactic. This has been the more traditional tactic before the democracies came, where faith has certain norms, family has certain norms, the clan that you belong to has certain norms, and if you misbehave, you are outcast. Punishment is enormous, and therefore most people comply despite their personal beliefs may be more divergent, but they are homogenized or they are standardized toward the norms of the society or the social group. And prescription by business practices, which I will go into some depth. So public policy is sometimes very useful in shaping customer expectations, especially when the side effects of consumption, when you consume as a consumer, it's going to have an impact on others and on you. When the side effects of consumption are harmful to the society, to the industry, and to you also. So often we overconsume products, we overconsume things that are unhealthy, and all that stuff by and large that we can talk about. So for example, it is government mandate that the industry encourages the government to say texting while driving, make it illegal, for example. There is a dark side of social media emerging right now, and I'm totally convinced in my mind that day will come when the freedom that we allow on the internet just may not be there, especially on social media platforms. There would be a code of conduct. This is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. There is an editorial control about what you can post on social media. There is some sort of a punishment for putting the wrong stuff, and all the stuff is likely to happen because the side effects of social media is such a potent drug. While it has a good efficacy, it has far greater side effects, both short-term and long-term, is my view. We also have now the triple bottom line. Everybody now believes that the role of business is not just to make money, but to preserve the planet and to serve the people, which is economic employment, sustainability of people, sustainability of the environment, and sustainability of the corporation. It's called a triple bottom line, etc., etc. We have lots of examples about public policy actually guiding the consumer to behave in the right way. There are many situations where peer-to-peer prescriptions are more effective in altering customer expectations, or at least make them less divergent, or peer pressure. There's a lot of research in social psychology, some in sociology, about group norms, some dark side of the group norms as to how you follow the crowd behavior to a leader, which actually is not good for the society. But most of these are really something that it makes you obey certain norms, or what in psychology they call normative beliefs, that comes from institutions and counterbalance your personal urges or personal beliefs that may come from your own ego, for example. So homeowners associations, if you are in a gated community, well, you cannot have landscaping the way you want it, you cannot have the color of the house the way you want it, you cannot have your yard certain way. There's a certain behavior that you have to comply with, and that shapes your expectation of how to be in that subdivision, how to be in that homeowner association. And there are neighborhood watch groups, which says that please, here are the do's and the don'ts of how you should be walking in the neighborhood, so you're not mistaken for a wrong person, creating all kinds of consequences. Last area is by business practice itself. I think as marketers, we don't do enough, or at least we don't publicize, we don't promote that our practices is what the customers must obey. Often it becomes as the strategy of last resort out of sheer frustration, as the airlines are finding that the cabin behavior of passenger is so unruly that they come out with very strong voice mandate. Flight attendants say you have to put your seat belts, shut off your cell phones, etc., etc. But it comes as if you are in a stressful situation. The same business practices you could educate in a more positive way. I've seen very funny informations at and the airlines where they are now having fun ways of educating you to say, by law, federal law, you have to put your seatbelts on. And the video and the actors on the video are really having fun. They're joking, laughing in a way where it makes you comply with that particular expectation, see? As opposed to these boring messages that used to come. So we have these procedures enforced, and that reduces the divergence of expectations, like check-in for airlines. There is a certain etiquette. If you are a medallion, if you are a platinum, if you are a gold, these are the lines for you, right? Whether you have to pre-check the bag or you have no bags, there are lines. These are all procedures. Cell phones, same way. In fact, there are guidelines provided about how it can be used properly and what are the inappropriate use. So I think business practices, all businesses have practices. Often they are unwritten laws or rules. Often they are not well articulated or written down, and they are definitely not promoted or provided as guidelines for customers how to behave. Most of those 75% of the incidents, which are critical incidents created by wrong customer expectations or outrageous customer expectations, could be all reduced if the marketer takes the initiative of educating, informing, and pretty much giving the message that customers must comply these rules and regulations that we have. So these three shaping strategies, which is more appropriate, which is less appropriate. So what I have done is to create a two-dimensional map. If the expectations in the marketplace are very fuzzy, really they don't know, as I mentioned, healthcare, education, definitely wealth management, or if they are very firm, such as buying toothpaste or buying detergents or buying bread, where I know exactly what I'm looking for, and to assimilate customers, reduce the range or the variance of expectations, whether the effort I will require will be very minimal versus very high, I can now come out with a conceptual framework at least that says which of these three shaping expectation strategies would be appropriate. So when the assimilation effort is very low cost to you, it can be done relatively easily, and the expectations are very fuzzy, people are willing to change their mind, their attitudes, then framing is the best mechanism. It is cheap, can be easily implemented, and the framing strategies are a part of your doing business anyhow. It's a question of amplifying, communicating, promoting. If the effort is at a moderate level and the expectations are somewhat firmed, then HRM processes, human resource management, would be ideal. But if the expectations are very well entrenched, like they are habits, people are unwilling to change their mindset, and to require to make the change to assimilate them will be a lot of effort, then the best thing is to go for compliance, especially compliance by law, because then customers have no choice but to comply, essentially. And given that situation, compliance becomes the most difficult, the most complex, and at the same time the most dramatic in terms of bringing about a change in the customer expectations in the marketplace. So let me conclude this whole long lecture about how to manage diverging customer expectations. Managing customer expectations is a prerequisite to creating a satisfied customer. We all know that thing. The old saying, under promise and over deliver. To create satisfied customer, exceed customer expectations, delight the customer, etc. The predominant approach has been to meet or exceed customer expectations, as I just mentioned. Accommodating the customer expectations through segmentation, mass customization, personalization, and customer satisfaction programs, unfortunately, is often very costly and operationally not doable even. Abandoning the unwanted customers, which is the second strategy of managing expectations. While it is becoming more prevalent, unfortunately, this often leads to lawsuits and regulatory hurdles. As I mentioned, probably the best way to abandon the customers is to outsource the customer to a third party and let them manage, let them shape their expectations, because you are unable or unwilling to do it. Outsourcing unwanted customer to a third party is preferably more realistic approach for not serving the customers or abandoning the customers. Marketing managers must think of using strategies that shape customer expectations and not just accommodate them, which is the main thrust of what I wanted to communicate in this video. How do we shape customer expectations, not just abandon or accommodate? One way to shape customer expectations is to duplicate what the HRM processes or HRM management does with employees. This includes employee selectivity, culture orientation, training and education, reward recognition, performance appraisal, retirement, and post-retirement relationships. A second approach is framing, positioning, which provides a perspective and a context which makes customers self-select about doing business with a company. To me, customers selecting themselves out is a much better approach than anything that will come about, which can happen through framing. Ultimately, it is also possible to use government compliance. This can be done by government regulations. Ultimately, it can be really done by compliance. One of them would be government compliance. Other one would be the group norms, a group or a sort of a socioeconomic norm of some sort can be used. And the last one is to use your own business practices and procedures to shape customer expectations. I hope you enjoyed this long lecture. This has been a rewarding thing for me to prepare, and I think it's a good message about managing diverging customer expectations.
Thanks for listening to this lecture on how to manage diverging customer expectations Part 4 with Professor Jagdish Sheth. For more about Professor Sheth and the Sheth Leadership Academy, visit www.shethleadershipacademy.com.